Chapter 176. As soon as Karen Daly was pushed into the cold storage, she felt a piercing coldness, which made her tremble with cold. The heavy door was slammed shut, and the surroundings were dead silent. Karen Daly tore off the blindfold covering her eyes first, but there was no light in the ice storage. It was so dark that she could not see at all. With her memory, Karen Daly slowly groped back to the door of the ice storage. She touched it and touched the doorknob. She pulled it, but the thick door didn't respond at all. She couldn't open it at all. It didn't work once, and she pulled it several times, but still couldn't open it. The door must have been locked from outside. She had tried hard for a long time, but it was of no use at all. She retracted her hand in disappointment. She didn't know how long she could hold on, and she didn't know if she could hold on until Kevin Kyle arrived. She groped and returned to a spacious spot. She touched her belly, took a deep breath, and whispered, "Baby, Mom will hold on, and you have to hold on too. Let's wait for Dad to save us together, okay?" Now she couldn't do anything but wait. She hoped that Kevin Kyle could arrive quickly enough to save her and her child before she was frozen into an ice stick. But as time went by, she felt so cold that she was about to lose consciousness. But she still didn't hear good news. She didn't want to give up, so she searched around in the darkness. Luckily, she found a military coat. She did not think too much. She immediately put on the general's coat. After putting on the army's coat, she did not feel warm, but she knew that this could prolong her freezing process. At the same time, Kevin Kyle asked someone to pretend to be him and send them money to the designated place of the kidnappers. And he led a group of people quietly to the place where the kidnappers and Karen Daly were. Several kidnappers were smoking and making phone calls. They were confirming whether they had gotten the money and whether the person who had given them the money was Leo Kyle. Kevin Kyle quickly looked around but did not see Karen Daly. When he saw the cold storage, he immediately guessed that Karen Daly was likely to be locked up there by the kidnappers. He didn't know how long Karen Daly had been locked up there. He didn't know how Karen Daly was doing now. So there was no time for him to delay. He had to settle the 3 people who guarded here as soon as possible. He turned over and nimbly jumped down from the wall. The 3 kidnappers immediately noticed him and were startled by his cold aura. But soon they reacted. Each of them picked up a wooden stick and rushed over. They scolded, "You're looking for death." The 3 kidnappers rushed over at the same time, and the 3 sticks swung at Kevin Kyle at the same time. Just as the sticks were about to fall on Kevin Kyle, he turned around quickly. A dramatic scene happened. Kevin Kyle, who was wearing a gray shirt and black trousers, was originally standing straight. But in an instant, Kevin Kyle had grabbed the stick quick. He waved his hand, and the heads of the 3 kidnappers were beaten heavily. They rubbed their beaten heads and looked even more ferocious. The 3 of them exchanged glances and rushed to Kevin Kyle together. Kevin Kyle didn't use a stick this time. He kicked them hard. In the blink of an eye, he stepped on a kidnapper. With one more step, he heard the sound of the kidnappers' broken bones and screams. The other 2 kidnappers finally realized that they were no match for Kevin Kyle, so they turned around and ran. However, as soon as they ran, they were tripped by something and fell to the ground with a bang at the same time. Kevin Kyle walked over and stepped on the hands of the 2 kidnappers. With a hard kick, he heard a terrible shriek like a pig being slain. When Nick Black arrived with a group of people, Kevin Kyle had already beaten down the 3 kidnappers. He looked at Kevin Kyle and waited for instructions. "Boss, watch them and wait for my call." Kevin Kyle did not hesitate as he quickly rushed to the cold storage and opened the door. Kevin Kyle turned on the light and opened the door. As soon as the door of the cold storage was opened, he saw Karen Daly, who was huddled up and shivering. He strode over and held her in his trembling hands. Karen Daly, who was about to freeze, tried hard to open her eyes. When she saw that it was Kevin Kyle, whom she had been looking forward to for a long time, tears rolled down from her eyes. She tried her best and said weakly, "Kevin, please, save our child. Don't let anything happen to our child." "Don't talk." Kevin Kyle picked her up, strode out, and carried Karen Daly to the ambulance that followed him. "Hurry up and save her and the child." The rescue team members who came with Kevin Kyle were all excellent medical staff who had years of experience. After receiving Kevin Kyle's order, they immediately started the first aid. Karen Daly knew that Kevin Kyle had arrived, but her consciousness was vague. She wanted to open her eyes, but she did not have the strength to do so. She wanted to talk to Kevin Kyle and ask him not to worry too much. She and the baby would be able to hold on, but she still had no strength to speak. Later, Karen Daly couldn't hear or see anything, as if she fell into a void. "Karen, wake up, I don't allow you to sleep." Kevin Kyle grabbed her hand and roared hysterically. He never knew what was the feeling when he cared about a person. When he saw her smile, it was a sunny day. When he saw her sad, it was a gloomy day. When he thought that she might leave him forever, it was as if someone was stabbing his heart. It hurt so much that his heart was bleeding. The reason why he was eager to make her his wife was due to her optimism and simple principles. After experiencing harm and betrayal, she could live a positive life. They should be able to live a good life together. In the following days, he gradually found that apart from her determination and optimism, she had other strengths. At first, he wanted to treat her well because she was his wife. As a husband, he should take good care of her. However, he didn't know that she was becoming more important to him. He didn't want to part with her anymore. Later, he treated her well, not only because she was his wife, but also because he really wanted to treat her well. Kevin Kyle held her hand tightly and said in a low voice again, "Don't worry, I won't let anything happen to you and the child." Karen Daly didn't know how much time had passed. After a long time, she felt as if she had passed away. Suddenly, she saw the light and saw the familiar, handsome face. However, he didn't look well groomed. Karen Daly knew he was always a neat person. It's the first time she saw him like this. Seeing him like this, for some reason, Karen Daly's heart sank and her heart was in a panic. "Kevin?" She opened her mouth and barely called out his name. Chapter 177? Karen, it's all right now. Hearing her voice suddenly, Kevin Kyle immediately woke up from his thoughts. He grabbed her hand, put it on his lips, and kissed them again and again. Karen Daly suddenly realized something and quickly touched her belly. Her stomach was still bulging and felt heavy. She pursed her lips and smiled gently. "Our child is still there. That's so good." Seeing that she breathed a sigh of relief, he looked at her smile and saw that she was still fine. Kevin Kyle's eyes suddenly wet. He didn't know what to say, so he bowed his head and kissed her forehead, her lips, and finally her round belly. "Kevin, your stubble is harsh." Karen Daly's abdominal skin was very sensitive. Being kissed by him and being pricked by his stubble made her very itchy. Kevin Kyle raised his head and stared at her with a deep look. There were a lot of things that he wanted to say to her, but he couldn't say it out loud. Karen Daly was most afraid to see Kevin Kyle like this. He looked at her affectionately, as if he wanted to give her the world. This made her feel sorry for him. She reached out to touch his slightly frowned brows and whispered, "The baby and I are fine now. Don't worry about it anymore." As soon as she finished her words, she was kissed by Kevin Kyle. This time, it was different from the tenderness just now, as it was so fierce and strong. Perhaps he was reassuring himself that she was fine. After Karen Daly woke up, she stayed in the hospital and was observed for 2 days. After making sure that both the baby and she were fine, Kevin Kyle took her home. Because Karen Daly was kidnapped, Mia Kyle rejected all the film offers and waited for Karen Daly at home every day. When she saw Karen Daly return home, she ran over in a hurry and said, "Sister-in-law, you stay away from her." Kevin Kyle was holding Karen Daly, stopping Mia Kyle from approaching. "Brother, Mia Kyle pursed her lips. "Kevin, what are you doing? You can't blame Mia on this matter." Karen Daly held Mia Kyle's hand and comforted her. "Mia, we are fine, don't worry." "Karen, fortunately, you and the baby are fine, or I would really feel guilty." These days, Kevin Kyle did not allow her to go to the hospital, and she did not sleep well. Kevin Kyle grabbed Karen Daly back and held her in his arms. "Go back to your room and rest. Don't worry about other things." Watching them leaving, Mia Kyle was extremely upset. But after thinking about it carefully, her sister-in-law was kidnapped carrying a baby in her womb. Her brother must have been frightened, so it was natural to blame her. Thinking of this, she rushed to the kitchen, poured a bowl of broth prepared by Aunt Jen, and wanted to serve Karen Daly. She knocked on the door, but did not hear any answer. She pushed the door open and entered. After entering, she saw Kevin Kyle and Karen Daly kissing each other. She put down the tray and quickly covered her eyes. "Sorry. You guys keep going on." After saying that, she turned around and ran away. Because she ran too fast, she didn't notice Neil Brown, who was following behind her, so she plunged into his arms. When she raised her head and saw him, a bold idea suddenly flashed through her mind. She reached out to hold his head and kissed him hard. She had no experience in this aspect, and bit him casually until she was pushed away by Neil Brown. Then she heard his angry voice. "If you don't know how to kiss, you can find someone to learn first. I don't have time to be your mentor." "What?" Hearing his words, Mia Kyle's anger rose. She narrowed her eyes and looked at him. "Neil Brown, repeat what did you say?" "Even if you let me repeat it 10 times, it's the same answer." He turned around and was about to leave, but he was held back by Mia Kyle. Mia Kyle gritted her teeth and said firmly, "Neil Brown, I like you, but you asked me to learn how to kiss other men. Are you a man or not?" Neil Brown said, "No." Mia Kyle repeated, "No? How could there be such a man in the world? How could he say that he was not a man?" Mia Kyle still wanted to make a fuss, but Kevin Kyle pushed the door and came out. He looked at them and said, "Mia, go and accompany your sister-in-law." "Okay." The reason Karen Daly was kidnapped this time was mainly because of her. Mia Kyle felt guilty all the time. He asked her to accompany Karen Daly. She wouldn't say no. After Mia Kyle entered the door, 2 equally outstanding men looked at each other. Neil Brown spoke before Kevin Kyle opened his mouth. "I'll help you guard here, and you can continue your matters." "Okay." Kevin Kyle nodded and turned to leave. Karen Daly and their baby were safe now, so he had time to deal with those who had hurt them. He personally drove to the cold storage where Karen Daly was tied up. When he saw the 3 people who were tied up on the ground, Nick Black, who had been guarding here all the time, immediately stepped forward and said respectfully, "President Kevin, these kidnappers were tied up since Karen Daly was admitted to the hospital. Although they were tied up, Nick Black did not let them starve. Nick Black was very clear about the character of Kevin Kyle. It would be too boring if he just let them starve to death. These men wouldn't suffer much. Director Kevin, we are wrong. We shouldn't have kidnapped your woman. The three kidnappers kept bowing, and their eyes were full of fear. If Kevin Kyle had ordered his men to kill them, they would have died quickly. However, Kevin Kyle did not do that. It was because they didn't know what Kevin Kyle would do. They were so afraid. In the hot summer, Kevin Kyle's gray suit was replaced by a gray shirt. He stood there cold and stern. He didn't say anything but stared at the three kidnappers. The three kidnappers were scared out of their wits. After a long time, he slowly opened his mouth and said, "Tell me, how did you torture my wife?" His tone was very light, but it made people's spines tingle. Nick Black added, "Tell the truth. Director Kevin may spare your life." The three kidnappers thought that they had not done too much to Karen Daly, so they rushed to tell Kevin Kyle the details. Pulled her hair and slapped her in the face. They threatened her to dig out her child and tried to offend her. Put her into the cold storage and tried to freeze her to death. Kevin Kyle said their crimes slowly and looked at them with gloomy eyes. When the three of them were so nervous that their heartbeat almost stopped, they heard Kevin Kyle's cold voice. "Nick, repeat all the things they have done to her. Remember to clean up so that it will be convenient for the police to close the case." After listening to Kevin Kyle's words, someone immediately went forward to carry out his orders. Soon, screams were heard one after another, and he watched coldly from the beginning to the end. Chapter 178. Mia Kyle accompanied Karen Daly, and then she came out of the room carefully after Karen Daly slept. She went downstairs to the living room and saw Neil Brown sitting on the sofa with his legs crossed. He was talking to someone on the phone. Looking at his flirtatious look, Mia Kyle felt uncomfortable. She walked to his side in a few steps and sat down. She wanted to hear whether he was talking to a man or a woman. However, before she could hear it, she was pushed away by Neil Brown. He glared at her and continued to chat as if there was no one else around. "I like you, Neil Brown." Mia Kyle stood up, put her hands on her waist, and shouted at him fiercely. Finally, Neil Brown hung up the phone and looked at her with raised eyebrows. "It's your business that you like me. Not my concern." "What?" Mia Kyle raised her foot and kicked him. But this time she didn't kick him. Instead, he kicked her instead. She lost her balance and fell backward with a bang. If it weren't for the thick carpet in the living room, she would hurt her back. Mia Kyle got up and stamped her feet in anger. "You're a man. How dare you bully a woman? What kind of man are you?" Neil Brown stood up, pulled his military uniform, and said, "In my world, there's only the strong and the weak. Gender does not matter." Mia Kyle grabbed the cup on the tea table and threw it at him. "Okay, let's have a good fight. Let's see who's stronger." "You?" Neil Brown leaned to one side and avoided the teacup. He glanced at her scornfully and said, "I don't want to fight with you, a little girl. You will cry when you lose, as if I am bullying you." "You are bullying me." As she said this, Mia Kyle pounced on him and grabbed him tightly like a small wild cat. She raised her head and bit on his face, leaving teeth marks on his face. Looking at her masterpiece, Mia Kyle was very satisfied and laughed happily. However, after only a few seconds of joy, she was lifted high by Neil Brown and thrown to the sofa. "Neil Brown, you." Mia Kyle touched her painful little butt and said aggrievedly, "Mia Kyle, you're almost 19 years old. Go outside and date. Don't pester me all day long. I don't have interest in a baby girl." After saying that, Neil Brown turned around and strode out. Mia Kyle was so angry that she shouted, "A baby girl?" She would soon be 19 years old. Her womanly figure should have already been well developed. How could he call her a baby? She was about to chase after him and ask for answers when she happened to run into Aunt Anne. She grabbed Aunt Anne and said, "Aunt Anne, look at me. How is my figure? Do I have a nice butt? And do you think I'm beautiful?" Aunt Anne was amused by Mia Kyle and said with a smile, "Of course our Miss Mia is beautiful. No one can compare to you in this world." "Then why doesn't Neil Brown like me?" Mia Kyle also felt that she was very beautiful and cute, and she was good at making people happy. But she just couldn't understand why Neil Brown didn't like her. Because... Aunt Anne's face changed slightly. She patted Mia Kyle and said earnestly, "Miss, he is your uncle." "He's not my uncle. I'm adopted by the Kyle family. My grandfather used to pair me and my brother together. Why can't I be with Neil Brown?" The relationship between them was never within Mia Kyle's consideration. Maybe you are not his type? This was the family business of the Kyle family, especially since it was related to Mia Kyle, who was the baby of the family. Aunt Anne couldn't make any comments. Did Neil Brown not like someone like her? Mia Kyle sat back on the sofa. She lowered her head and thought about it carefully. Neil Brown didn't like her type, so what kind of girl did he like? It was not difficult for her to change into that kind of girl. After thinking about it, Mia Kyle's frustration disappeared in an instant. She could change fast. Anyway, she would definitely find a way to get Neil Brown. When Karen Daly woke up and opened her eyes, Kevin Kyle was already sitting by her bed, staring at her tenderly. Karen Daly rubbed her eyes and asked, "Ed, didn't you say that you have something to do? It was finished so soon?" "Yeah, I'm done." Kevin Kyle rubbed her head and helped her sit up. "Have you had enough sleep?" Yeah, but the baby doesn't seem so. Karen Daly touched her belly and said, I really wish to have the baby born soon. I really want to know whether it's a boy or a girl, and whether the baby looks like me or not. Kevin Kyle took a coat and put it on her, saying, whether it's like you or me, it's still our child. I'll like him or her very much. Kevin? Karen Daly called him, but she did not continue. Kevin Kyle asked, what do you want to say? Karen Daly pursed her lips and apologized. This time, it's all my fault. It's all my fault for being so careless. You must be very worried. Kevin Kyle said in a deep voice, don't you dare to talk nonsense? Karen Daly pouted and said, do you want to hit me? No. As soon as he finished speaking, he held her head and leaned over to kiss her. After a long time, he let her go and said, I'll punish you in this way if you speak nonsense again. Karen Daly's face turned red again, and she thought in her heart, in fact, I like this kind of punishment very much. When they went downstairs, Mia Kyle was in a daze on the sofa in the living room. In fact, she was not in a daze, but appeared angry. Karen Daly asked, Mia, what's wrong? Mia Kyle looked up at them and said gloomily, it's nothing. Neil Brown left as soon as her brother came back. Mia Kyle wanted him to stay for dinner before leaving, but he ignored her. She had already made it clear to him that she liked him and wanted to marry him, but he said that her wishes had nothing to do with him. Come on, the person she likes was him. How can it have nothing to do with him? Thinking of his teasing tone, Mia Kyle gnashed her teeth in anger. Just wait and see. If he dares to be nice to other women, and if he doesn't like her back, she will definitely blow up his base camp. Kevin, you go to the dining room first. Kevin Kyle was dismissed. Karen Daly sat down beside Mia Kyle and rubbed her head. Mia, are you thinking about your sweetheart again? Mia Kyle said stubbornly, no, I don't. I won't be upset about Neil Brown. Karen Daly smiled and said, Mia, this kind of thing can't be rushed. Let's eat first, and then we'll discuss it later after we're full. Hearing Karen Daly's words, Mia Kyle smiled again and said, sister-in-law, do you have any idea? Karen Daly smiled gently and said, let's think about it together. It's better than just thinking about it by yourself. Chapter 179. On the dinner table, there were plenty of dishes, such as sautéed chicken, clam chowder, porridge, some vegetables, and more. They were all good for pregnant women. Mia Kyle ate the food bit by bit and looked at the two of them from time to time. Her brother ate so happily with her sister-in-law, even though the food tasted awful. The two of them even fed each other from time to time. The most incredible thing was that her brother, who used to be a germaphobe, even ate the leftovers of her sister-in-law. Before her brother got married, every time he ate, there were always people preparing food, especially for him. When they were having a meal together, they would always use a serving spoon. But now, he ate the leftovers of Karen Daly and enjoyed it. His face was full of enjoyment, which looked so odd. Seeing that the couple were so happy and affectionate, and thinking about Neil Brown and herself, Mia Kyle felt annoyed. Can they be more considerate of me, a single person without anyone's love? Suddenly she thought about the elders at home. If they were here, at least they loved her. She would not be as pitiful as she was now. Brother, sister-in-law, grandpa, and our parents are very worried after hearing that Karen was kidnapped. They will be here in 2 days, Mia Kyle said. Grandpa Kyle had called Mia Kyle yesterday to ask her how was she doing in the film. Mia Kyle spilled the beans, so Grandpa Kyle heard about Karen Daly's abduction. Especially when he learned that the kidnapper originally wanted to kidnap Mia Kyle, Grandpa Kyle was furious, so he decided to come. I will send someone to prepare for them in advance. Kevin Kyle said. He too thought it was reasonable to hear that his family would come back. Karen Daly's belly was getting bigger day by day, and she was going to give birth in less than 2 months. It would be great if there were more people in the family to take care of her. When she suddenly heard that Grandpa Kyle would come, Karen Daly's heart skipped a beat. Her hand, which was holding her spoon, paused slightly. On the day she confirmed that she was pregnant, Grandpa Kyle had asked her to leave Kevin Kyle, but she refused. After that, Grandpa Kyle did not seek her out again, nor did she receive any news from him. She did not know if he had given up or if he had other ideas. Thinking of this, Karen Daly touched her round belly subconsciously. The child was still not yet due, so she was not at ease and was very worried about any accidents. However, no matter what, the child in her belly was Kevin Kyle's child. No matter how dissatisfied Grandpa Kyle was with her, he would not touch the bloodline of the Kyle family. But on second thought, the child in her womb was not only the bloodline of the Kyle family, but also her bloodline. According to Grandpa Kyle's idea, half of the baby's bloodline was of a subpar status. What if Grandpa Kyle wanted to get rid of her child? Karen, what's wrong? Kevin Kyle's voice pulled Karen Daly back from her thoughts. She turned around and looked into his caring eyes. She smiled and said, I'm full. Kevin Kyle put down his utensils and gracefully wiped his mouth with a tissue. Let's go. I'll stroll outside with you for a while. Karen Daly nodded. Okay? Because it was the coastal area, it was very hot in the daytime in Chatterton Town. In the evening, there was wind, so the weather was cool. After dinner, the couple strolled on the lawns of the villa, feeling very comfortable. Kevin Kyle held Karen Daly's hand and walked very slowly, completely in line with her rhythm. He patiently kept her company. All of Kevin Kyle's thoughts were focused on Karen Daly, and no one knew where Karen Daly's thoughts went. She thought of Samuel Daly, her mother who had never had a good life, and the mystery man. Who was that man? Did he know her existence? Karen Daly wanted to know, and she even wanted to find a private detective to find out who the man was. But what could she do if she found out? Her mother had never mentioned anything of that sort to her since she was a child. She just wanted her to grow up like an ordinary child. Karen, what are you thinking about? Kevin Kyle's low voice interrupted Karen Daly's thoughts again. She looked at him with a smile and said, I'm wondering why you like gray clothes so much. He wore a gray suit on a cold day and a gray shirt on a summer day. Couldn't he change his choice of color? Kevin Kyle replied, I'm used to it. He didn't know when he had begun to wear gray, and it had never changed. It was not that he liked it. It might be a habit now, a symbol that belonged to him. Karen Daly looked at him for a long time, then cocked her head and thought, I think you look better in white. Would you like to try it? Okay. Without thinking too much, he nodded and agreed. She was able to change his habits for many years with just one sentence. He listened to her and doted on her, but there were a lot of things hidden in her heart that she couldn't tell him clearly. After thinking for a while, Karen Daly said, Kevin, you know that my biological father was not Samuel Daly, right? Yes. Although Kevin Kyle was a little surprised to hear Karen Daly ask this question, he nodded honestly and held her tighter at the same time. He said in a low voice, But Karen, I told you before, our life is what I only concern. Of course, she knew that he wouldn't care about her past. If he did, he wouldn't have insisted on marrying her after he found out so much about her background. She asked again, Do you know who he is? Yeah. Kevin Kyle stood still, with his hands on Karen Daly's shoulders, and said seriously, Karen, your biological father was a good man who was responsible, but he passed away in an accident years ago, or he wouldn't have left you or your mother behind. An accident years ago? Karen Daly took in a breath and smiled helplessly. So I'm still alone? Kevin Kyle frowned slightly and said discontentedly, You have the baby and me. Of course, I know that I have the baby and you, but I wish there was someone else in my family. If you dare to bully me, someone will take care of you for me. Kevin Kyle's jealous expression was particularly awkward and cute, and she could not help but laugh. Silly. Kevin Kyle gently pulled her into his arms and asked seriously, If your biological father had another child, are you willing to see them? I'm afraid they don't want to see me. Karen Daly smiled and said, No one would be happy if their father had another child with another woman. Don't think too much. Let's take a walk. Kevin Kyle rubbed her head and held her hand to continue the walk. How Karen Daly wished that he could hold her hand like this until the end of life. However, she was inexplicably panic-stricken. She always felt that such a beautiful day would leave her, and she would eventually lose him forever. Chapter 180. After wandering in the yard for about half an hour, Karen Daly broke out in a sweat and went straight to the bathroom to take a bath after returning to her room. Karen Daly had a big belly. Kevin Kyle was worried that she would slip or fall down. In the past few days, he would always help her with her bath. In the beginning, Karen Daly was very shy. When he helped her, she would be so shy that her whole body would blush. But she got used to it, because Kevin Kyle said that he had no other intentions when helping. She stood naked in front of him, but she never thought that this man's self-control was really extraordinary. That was because she had never known that every time after helping her take a bath, Kevin Kyle would return to the bathroom and take a cold shower. He was a normal man, of course. He had his needs, and especially since the woman standing in front of him was his wife. How could he not think about anything else? Therefore, whenever he helped Karen Daly shower, he would always put on an unusually cold posture. In fact, it was just a cover-up of his desire for her. When Kevin Kyle's hand touched the round belly of Karen Daly, she quietly took a breath and plucked up the courage to press his big palm down. She looked up at him with a red face and whispered, Mr. Kyle, the doctor said that the fetus is very stable now. Yes, I know. Kevin Kyle nodded with a serious look on his face, indicating that he had known it. Do you really know? Karen Daly asked. Looking at Kevin Kyle's serious face, Karen Daly felt that she was talking to a wall again. The period of time, Kevin Kyle talked more than his before, but his EQ was still low. He just was forced to act this way because he was afraid that he didn't understand what she wanted to say. Sure enough, he ignored her. He took the towel back and wrapped her up. Then he carried her back to the room. After putting her on the bed, he got up and was about to leave. Karen Daly grabbed him and said, Mr. Kyle, the doctor said that the fetus is stable. So we can go to sleep. Kevin Kyle interrupted her and pulled her fingers away. He pulled back his hand, turned around, and went to the bathroom. Karen Daly. It seemed that if she didn't make it clear to him, he wouldn't know what she was going to do. Karen Daly lay on the bed and thought about it carefully. After a while, she must find a way to throw herself directly at him and not give him a chance to refuse. It didn't take long for Kevin Kyle to come out of the bathroom. He was still the same as usual, with a white bath towel around his waist, revealing his strong abdominal muscles. He looked very sexy. When he sat on the bed, Karen Daly rolled over and hugged him, but she was too shy to look at him. She lowered her head and said, "Mr. Kyle, don't you want to do anything?" Since she was pregnant, he had never asked her for such a request. It would be very uncomfortable for a normal man to live without sex for so many months. "What are you thinking about?" Kevin Kyle asked seriously, but there was a faint smile in his eyes, but he simply lowered his head. "Don't you want me?" Karen Daly had the courage to say these words, and her face was also red and hot. "Stop kidding," Kevin Kyle responded. How could he not want her? But compared to his own desire, he was more worried that he would hurt the baby. Although the doctor said that since she was safe, it was appropriate to have sex, as long as it's not too often, he did not dare to do so. Karen Daly certainly knew what he was worried about. It was precisely because of him that she was more reluctant to see him suffer. She swallowed nervously and said, But I really want to." After that, Karen Daly was so shy that she couldn't say anything. She let go of his arm, turned over, and moved aside. Karen Daly let him go, and Kevin Kyle suddenly felt that his heart was inexplicably empty, as if there was a gust of wind blowing from his chest. He stretched out his big palm and grabbed her back to hug her. He grabbed her hand and kissed her. "If you really want to, then we should be careful." Karen Daly buried her head in his chest with a red face. Her slender and white fingers touched the bath towel around his waist, and she wanted to tear it apart. However, she was too nervous. She found it hard to take off Kevin Kyle's bath towel. That was extremely awkward. She blushed. Kevin Kyle grabbed her hand and said softly, "Lie down and leave it to me." "Oh," Karen Daly nodded. Her tender cheeks had already turned red, giving off a seductive luster. Kevin Kyle was not as hasty and direct as she was. He bowed his head and kissed her. He kissed her tender lips and went down slowly. His kiss was very gentle, as if she was his most important treasure. It seemed that he could break her into pieces with just a little force. His kiss was so gentle that it made Karen Daly's heart ache. It was so gentle that she was willing to immerse herself in his tenderness for the rest of her life and never wake up. When it was over, Karen Daly's body was covered with a layer of sweat again. Kevin Kyle wanted to carry her up to take a quick rinse, but she was lying on his chest and did not allow him to move. She drew a circle on his chest with a finger and whispered, "Mr. Kyle, you must have not been satisfied." He could not have his desires fulfilled for a long time, but he still tried his best to restrain himself and did take care of her. He took care of her all the time. "Don't move anymore." Kevin Kyle grabbed her moving hand, pressed his jaw on her head, and gently rubbed it. "Karen Daly, let's give the child a name." Karen Daly asked, "I thought your parents and grandfather would need to name our child." Kevin Kyle said, "It's our baby. I guess it's time to change the rule." Karen Daly remembered that because Mia Kyle didn't follow the rules, she had often been criticized by Kevin Kyle. She didn't expect that he would say such words today. It was really surprising. "What name do you want to give the child?" she asked again. "I've thought a lot about it during this period of time, but I'm not satisfied with it. Why don't we think about it together?" In the end, he just wanted the two of them to name their child together. "Then let's think about it tomorrow. I'm sleepy and want to sleep." It had been a long time since she had such an exercise. In addition, she had a big belly, so Karen Daly was really tired. "Go to sleep then." Kevin Kyle put her down, pulled the quilt over her, and gently stroked her round belly with his big palm. "Okay." Karen Daly nodded and fell asleep in a short while. Karen Daly fell asleep for a long time before Kevin Kyle turned over and got out of bed. He came to the balcony and dialed a phone number. "Tomorrow, you'll come to Chatterton Town." "Why you asked me to go to Chatterton Town all of a sudden? Is it because my sister wants to meet me?" George Ken's voice came from the other end of the phone. "Yes," Kevin Kyle answered briefly and directly. Karen Daly wanted to meet her relatives. She wanted to have a greater sense of security, so he helped her to fulfill her wish.